on and maybe we can have a Q&A at the end. I just want to remind everyone that Stefan has to leave at 7:30. Is that right, Stefan?
Right, yeah.
He has to
sorry about that.
Yeah, so it's going to be like a short reading group. As Americans say, we're going to have a hard stop at 7:30. Sorry about that. So is that okay for you, Stefan? Would you like to tell us what how you came about with this book and this interest on piracy and pirates?
Okay. I see it's recorded. I hope this is you and not somebody outside of the session.
I want it to be recorded and put on YouTube.
Yeah, it's you. That's good. It's not someone who has broken in the session.
No.
Okay, that's great. Okay.
Yes, we always record the sessions and we usually put it on YouTube. Are you okay with it?
Yeah, it's no problem, as long as it's the right people to do so. And not the guys with the loud music just now. So, okay, let's start. How did I get interested in piracy and writing this book? A little perhaps of my own background. I'm a historian, studied in the Netherlands, and I was born and raised and still live in the city of Amsterdam. Pirates have, of course, that's to everyone been a kind of childhood's dream on the one hand. But at a certain point, especially in the 1980s and later, a lot of let's say the cultural symbols of piracy were also taken up by, for instance, the squatting movement, what is then called new social movements. So people really felt a kind of link to the whole thing of piracy and the idea of pirate as a kind of libertarian hero. I think we will come back to that later. Within certain circles, a kind of discussion was triggered, especially by, I took a number of books from my library to explain what I'm talking about. You probably, I don't know if you can see it, you probably all read or heard of the book by Hakim Bey, Temporary Autonomous Zone. I'm not sure how popular it is now, but it was quite popular in the early 1990s because he kind of came up with the idea. It was not a real original idea, but he gave it a new image. The idea of that revolution is not about changing society, but it is about creating these what he calls temporary autonomous zones. What, for instance, people in the squatting movements were doing, instead of changing the whole society, they created free spaces within this society. And interesting about this book is that one of the historical examples Hakim Bey gave of this were what he called pirate utopias. And we get back to that later, but a few years later, he published under his own name and not under his nom de guerre Hakim Bey, another book which became quite famous actually in certain circles. That's Pirate Utopias by Peter Lamborn Wilson. And it's especially about one city in Morocco, Saleh, which was in the early 17th century a kind of pirate republic. And Peter gave this as the kind of example of how people created their own autonomous worlds and were able to, at least on a temporary basis, to gain their freedom fighting against the broader world. Now, I happen to know all these books were published with Autonomous Media in New York. That's a kind of anarchist left-wing publishing company in New York. Some of you may know some of the stuff they still bring out. And I knew one of the editors of Autonomous Media, and I was also interested myself a little bit in the subject. Actually, I had once on my travels through Morocco visited Saleh, and there's still a kind of pirate fortress there. But I was kind of, as a professional historian, I was not too enthusiastic about these kind of books, because it's kind of like taking everything you want out of history and leaving everything you do not want out of it. And there was also a very strong feminist critique on these books of Haki Bey, saying like, okay, you can say these pirates fight for their freedom, but what about all the women they raped and all the poor people they robbed? Well, as I said, another important problem with the book Pirate Utopias is that it has not much in the sense of reports of what the pirates themselves said about what they were doing, or detailed biographical stories about what they were actually doing. And Peter also claimed, well, they are not around for English piracy in the English language. I think since then there has been done a lot of new research, which I might be able to come back later. But also I knew that there's one famous book in the Dutch language, actually about a Dutch pirate from the time who went to Saleh and who was actually one of these pirates. And this book had a lot of biographical detail on this person. So I told this editor of Autonomous Media, okay, these are interesting books, but we have this very interesting source in Dutch. It's never been translated in English. So what if I come up with some kind of, not exactly a translation of it, but a retelling and an interpretation of this biography of this pirate who was named Klaas Compaan and who lived very close to Amsterdam. So the editor said, okay, that's fine. Write it, Autonomous Media will publish it. I wrote it. Then they said, okay, but actually we don't do this kind of small book, so we want to have extra material. So I found another Dutch pirate, a buccaneer called Jan Erasmus Reining. He was one of the later 17th century buccaneers. And the second part of the book goes about Reining. And then they still said, we need a third part. Well, to cut the story short, it took years and years before this book was finally written and published. But the end result was The Devil's Anarchy, which has had actually very mixed comments from both people interested in the social politics of piracy and anarchism and by professional historians. And this is also partly because the subject is actually quite hotly debated and is not a very neutral subject. So this is how this Devil's Anarchy came into being, and a large influence also on this book was the whole idea of social banditism. This was by the famous Marxist historian Hobsbawm, who wrote the book Bandits, in which he gave all kinds of examples of criminals, from robbers to highwaymen to pirates, And he claimed this is a kind of, this was not only criminal behavior, this was a kind of protest of the lower classes against the upper classes and against the slowly disappearing traditional societies which were taken over by the new capitalist systems of the 17th century and later. So this is a bit how my interest and how the book came about. I hope this answers your question, Vasily.
Yes, thank you very much, Stefan. I'll put the reference in the chat at some point. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the selection of texts that you suggested for us to read today?
Yes, so the two of these. So I thought there are, of course, a lot of themes you can discover, but in my talks with Nika and also in my own research at the moment, it's very much directed about the whole idea of energy as organization. In this sense, I'm quite influenced by another famous book, which I don't have at hand right now, but I don't know if you know this book by Colin Ward, W-A-R-D, Anarchy in Action. And he was one of a new school of anarchists in the 1960s, which actually said, okay, anarchism is not about you have the state and you have the non-state, but it's about kind of dialectics in which you continuously try to organize yourself in a more horizontal and less hierarchical way. And a lot of discussions about this is actually from the point of view of people who are sympathetic to anarchists or call themselves anarchists and try to find ways to implement more anarchist forms of organization. And one of the things I found interest not only about these pirates, but also about other groups in history, is that it works the other way around. So actually their position in society made them to create a kind of non-hierarchical, very horizontal, very flexible way of organization, which also worked for them. And also, I think, was also the only way they could actually work in a world dominated by great colonial powers or great trading companies or what you have. But it's not that they developed these systems because they thought, okay, we are anarchists, so we have to have an anarchist system of organization. I mean, they didn't call them anarchists themselves anarchists at all, of course. It wouldn't mean anything to them. They created a kind of spontaneous order, which, in my view, is very much the practical expression of their position in society. So very much not about controlling large territories. It's very much about you have to fight in the territory of someone else, and you have to develop practices, ways of operation. If you want to use the terminology of Michel de Certeau, a kind of methods of stealth also. And then you see that this is what they come up, and this is also a kind of constant inference in the history of piracy. So in the examples text I gave to you, you see that both the early 17th century pirates who operate very close, they operate still in European waters. They have their hideouts mostly in places like in Ireland and in Northern Africa. But they have the same kind of ways of operation and organization as the famous buccaneers, or the brethren of the coast, that they call themselves, who operate in the Caribbean. And they themselves, again, have the same ways of operation as the classical pirates we all know from the movies and everybody, and that's from the period of, say, between 1715 and 1725, what is called the Golden Age of Piracy. And then you have also all these famous types like Blackbeards, and you can name them. And they still have the same kinds of ways of operation and organization. And in my current research, you can, I've also, my latest book is about smugglers, Dutch smugglers in the 20th century. And you see, again, they have these kinds of anarchic ways of operation. And if you go back also to the great Viking pirates of the 9th century, who there's very interesting work being done in the last years, who also showed, no, these were not people sent out by some Viking kings. These were actually bands of warriors who came together, focused around one famous Viking pirates, and actually created their own autonomous places in the process. So this and the two texts I gave to you from the book is also very much about first the organization of the buccaneers, and second, but maybe we should go a little more into depth about that. Second, the way the pirates of the Golden Age of Pirates, like Blackbeard Roberts and others, organized themselves and their crews. So you see, they made a kind of, to organize their energy, they made a kind of, yeah, you can always say contractual agreements. So they agreed with themselves, okay, we can do this, we can do this. In these kind of situations, someone has this authority, and in other kinds of situation, this authority vanishes. Now there are a lot of things to say about that, but maybe I should first say why I chose the third text, which is from an encyclopedia for which I wrote the entry short time ago, because it places the pirates, and especially the Dutch pirates, more clearly within the maritime world of that time. And also because what we very much must realize is that these are all people who live in a world in which these boundaries between themselves and others are not always so fixed. They can move from one world to the other. So it became only really difficult if you became really notorious. But even then, a pirate as Compan, who was the most famous pirate of his day, he actually returned to his hometown. He was given a pardon by the authorities, and spent the last 30 years of his life fishing. So you see that there's a lot of flexibility going on here.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I was not sure who actually wrote this last text, which is really interesting, because it helps us distinguish between what you call privateering and piracy per se, and it's actually really interesting. It seems to be much more difficult actually to make the distinction that we usually make between the two. So yeah.
Yeah, what you see is that the rising, well, I would say that there are nation states, but what later would become nation states are really trying to control armed robbery at seas. That's basically what piracy is. but they don't want to dispense with it yet. I mean, you must realize even in the Second World War, the Germans and the English all have privateers working for them. Only this of course, a very dangerous road. You give some people a lot of freedom to go out for their own account, and then who guarantees that they will come back and do what you told them? So they really try very hard to control the privateering with all kinds of rules. Only sometimes someone breaks out of it. But it definitely is that it's the same class of people, the same social group of people that these people are recruited from.
Yeah, and you are saying that they really go back and forth between the two over the course of their life to one direction or the other, really.
Yeah, but the evidence shows that or at least some of them are able to do so. And this is also a lot to do with actually the lack of power of the authorities to control them. So that's why the favorite methods, for instance, in the 17th century is more or less a pirate. Okay, if it's possible, you chase them and you hang him, but mostly it's not possible. So you give him a pardon. So he comes back. That has the advantage also that he's going to give some gifts to people at the court. Or you make him like admiral in your own navy. So the buccaneer guy, I also wrote it, Jan Erasmus Reining. He's a typical person who moves from one world to the other, and he actually ends his life as a captain in the Dutch Navy. So that's quite interesting. And the biography, which is written about him then by someone, actually doesn't really make clear that he was a pirate. And they say, okay, he was fighting against the Spanish or whatever, but there was no war with the Spanish then. So, but it's kind of formulated in such a way that that it's still acceptable.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please go for it.
So can you actually describe in more details how these places of autonomy was functioning? So the places of autonomy.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, to start with, forget about that this was some kind of anarchist utopia where people lived freely and in harmony with each other. So basically, these are places which in practice have broken loose from the authority of the king or the state or any larger authority, not in a formal way. For instance, a good example is Tortuga, a Defense of Pirates of the Caribbean. For them, it may ring a bell. This pirate island, which actually existed, it's just before the coast of Haiti, what is now Haiti. And actually, there was a governor there of the French West India Company. Just like on the Caribbean islands where the pirates gathered, there were representatives of the authorities, only they didn't have any real authority. So they were mostly ignored. Also, they were often like corrupt. So they took a part of the shares, or they were good-willing, but realized that it was not in their power to really order the pirates about. Also because a lot of these settlements were threatened by the Spanish, and the only people actually able to fight them were the pirates. So you don't want to lose the pirates. And that meant that you have a situation on these Caribbean islands of one could always say dual power. You have some pirate chiefs walking around. You have the crews who can choose which chief they will sail with. And you have, of course, the whole infrastructure of traders, merchants, brothel keepers, tavern keepers, who are actually making a lot of money in this economy. Now, at a certain moment, the state gets stronger, so they move the pirates out. And then you have, for instance, they go to settlements like on Madagascar, where David Graeber's book is about, which are actually kind of wild territories. There are some indigenous people there, but a lot of the island is not controlled, and they build their own settlements, which is basically often a kind of trading post where the pirates can rest, re-equip, sell their loot. An important point in the functioning of these islands is also that they have very good contacts with, for instance, merchants in New York who send them goods, but also make arrangements for pirates who want to go back to Europe to go on their ships and go back to Europe. So this is actually a second type of these autonomous settlements. But you had also a third type, and that was, for instance, Saleh in Morocco, where the pirate chiefs actually kind of form a council to rule the city. So they appoint an admiral. So these are the kind of environments which are not so much totally anarchist utopias, but places where you can, where you are free to operate as a pirate. You are not persecuted. You can make your arrangements with people. You have connections to international markets, to food, etc. And that's the kind of pirate utopia which you must imagine. So it's all very flexible. It's all very. It's not like, okay, this is an anarchist state and we have these. It's more like like in the Ukraine, in the Russian Civil War, the Makhnovchina, the actual army, is not making a community, they are fighting. And in certain villages, people help them. And also they fight for these villages, but they're not an autonomous settlement as such, except in the sense that they are an autonomous settlement on the move. Just like the ships themselves are like autonomous settlements. But it's all very flexible. It's all continuously endangered, of course. So it's all like anarchy and autonomy in motion. I hope this answers your question a little bit.
And then this, yeah, but then the next question is actually yesterday I had a long talk with Adam Curtis, and he was describing how after Occupy he felt that Occupy could do much more, fight much more, you know, and he felt that they were able to win, and he felt very frustrated that they didn't. And so my question is, what do you feel about success and failure? Because pirates, you know, it's very little. Most likely they would be killed like by 8:30, and their lives were very short and not successful from the normal point of view. And now you're saying that stable utopias that they built. So it looks like they're a bunch of losers, huh? What would you say about this? And why we're so fascinated? Everybody, like since 500 years,
Yeah.
everybody talking about them. Kids are
Right.
playing. So why?
Yeah. So
Why is that?
perhaps they're not so losers after all. If you look at the class of people they come from, for instance, let me take one example. You have the ship of Jack Bellamy, who's one of the pirates to whom are attributed very anarchist sentiments. And we have actually quite some detail about the composition of his crew because they were all hanged. So we have the trial records and we know a little bit where they come from. So these are like people who with a lot of diverse backgrounds. They include some African people, probably not slaves, but people who had already been freed in the New World and joined the pirates, but maybe also some slaves, and definitely they were all former slaves. So they had not much career prospects, we would say. And the same goes actually for every ordinary sailor of their day. They would all run a lot of risks in their profession. Their life expectancy was not great. They were all very lowly paid. Often they didn't have a job at all. A lot of the Golden Age pirates we know were actually former Navy sailors who were, because after the Spanish War of the Succession, the British Navy discharged a lot of its personnel. So, and in the and also on the ships, they were very much subject to a quite rigorous discipline, which included very hard punishment, like keel hauling, whipping, you name it. So for a lot of these people, at a certain moment, the point of no return came. Then they said, okay, if we join the pirates, we have something to say over what we do. I could go, I can drink rum whenever I want. If we make a lot of money, we share it. So they made at least some of them made really a lot, at times a lot more money than any sailor would have done. Only they mostly would have squandered again in a few days when coming back. Okay, but then you go out again and you find new money. So you see that for a lot of these people, and it's interesting, your question is very interesting because this was one of the comments of a reviewer of the International Journal of Maritime History in my book. So why, if this pirate existence was so hard, why did they go on with it? But I think it was often not harder than that of than they would have had in their normal jobs, as in the merchants or in the Navy. It had a lot of compensation. And you actually see that a lot of these people actually choose to do so. So I think, and I agree in this a little bit with Peter Lambert Wilson, they kind of could become masters of their fate for, although very temporarily and for a short time, and in a world we would not specifically like, I think, because it would be we would not be used to that kind of violence around us. But I think that was the benefit of piracy. And a few ones really got rich, by the way. So a lot of interest in the piracy is actually, I'm going to show you another book. Is this book by Daniel Defoe. There's a new edition, The King of Pirates. And it's about Ephry, who was the most famous pirate of his day. He also pops up in David's book. They actually succeeded in taking over a ship, capturing a very rich ship from an Indian prince, selling the loot and disappearing. So nobody ever found Ephry again. So what happened? Did he settle down in peace? Was he hanged somewhere? Did he die in poverty? Nobody knows, but you know, there were people who might have become actually rich. A few ones at least. So that would be my answer to your question.
I would ask more, but if somebody else wants to ask questions, go ahead. And
I was wondering what were they doing once they were back on land? Was there any kind of organizing there, or they were just autonomous and this kind of, they had this organization only when they were at sea? Is there any kind of record of that?
You mean when they were still sailing on the pirate ships, but came at land in harbors and spent some time there? Well, that's a very interesting aspect of maritime cultural history. Basically, I think they did what sailors always do when they get on land, and that is basically partying. So what we also must realize from piracy is that it's very enclosed in a maritime culture, in which there's a huge difference between sailors and landlubbers like us, people on the land. So they would have 48 weeks on the sea, but 4 weeks on the land. And when they are in the harbor, they basically go to the nearest tavern. Apart, of course, from the clever ones who have to organize to sell the loot, to take new resources in, etc. But basically, most are what we can see basically either partying or chilling. I mean, they drink a lot of alcohol, of course, so I presume they will have a lot of hangovers also.
Sorry. I really like the rules and regulation that you quote in your second text, the hierarchy versus anarchy. You know, those 11-point rules and regulation on the on the Jolly Roger, really. And it seems that I think this is here. They when they're on the land, they actually can fight it out. They can resolve the issues they had on board, which they can't do on the boat. And also, you were talking about drinking. They can drink as much as they want, but they have to do that on the deck, or it's like there are some very specific rules, and it's actually quite funny to read. It's a great quote, I think.
Yeah, it's also very interesting. Part of it because it's very interesting that when they were not pirates on the ships, they were often confronted with an early form of our present day alcohol and drug regulation. So it's very interesting that this is so important to them that they put it in their regulations. I must say, we are not totally sure that these articles are 100% historically accurate, but they do give kind of the atmosphere. It's also a very, I think if you go back to the whole theme of Anarchy as organization, it's a very basic thing for those people to not to say, okay, we go out and we see what happens, but actually to lay down beforehand some kind of eventualities and how they would proceed in that. Also, they signal, if you read the articles carefully, possible, from their own experience, possible areas of conflict. So, okay, everybody can drink rum unless it gets scarce, then we have to do something. Gambling, for instance, there are a lot of stories about how crews getting very much divided about gambling, people gambling away their share of the loot, so not really interested in going home, while other people get more and more loot and want to go home to spend it. The problem of if you capture a ship and there are women on board, so this would also be a potential source of conflict. So they interesting in these articles that they arrange to eliminate this conflict. So, okay, we don't take the women on board, we leave them where they are. We don't gamble, we limit drinking if possible. If it went so in reality is of course another question. But the fact that they prepare for eventualities and make agreements about this. And also the buccaneers earlier who say, okay, if you lose an eye, we compensate you for it, kind of insurance policy. Also, another very important point is the position of the quartermaster. So you want to, you don't want another stuffy figure bossing you around. That's not why you became a pirate. But on the other hand, if there's nobody leading when you actually have to chase someone or enter, then you are in big trouble. Or if someone is totally incompetent and is leading you. So there is a captain who has certain powers, but this creates, of course, a power position. And interesting in these articles is that they create a counter position by electing a quartermaster, who traditionally is the person who speaks for the sailors to the captain. And the position of the quartermaster is actually very important, and in a lot of positions more powerful than that of the captain. This is a nice thing, which is not not often focused enough in, I think, in books and movies about pirates. And there's one series, by the way, I hate to say it, but it's now on Netflix. It's called Black Sails, and there this whole interplay between captain and quartermaster is very much
so
detailed. Yeah, I very much like it. Yeah, it's very clever. So
yeah.
Okay, and there are people
like what you said.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, you said it's like I was like really progressive, you know. They had a social policy. They were, you know, interracial racial society, while the empire was totally racist. They have, you know, women, sometimes pirates. They allow homosexuality. So they were like imagine, you know, much better than any of the progressive Western societies now. But still, even in like, you know, kind of pirate children books, they depicted criminals. So it's such a cognitive dissonance between the reality of how they lived and they still considered to be bandits.
Yeah, but that's, they are also bandits. I mean, that's how they live. I mean, that's not a contradiction. And I think what for us is progressive about them is for them, well, partly because a lot of the categories in which we discuss these kind of things did not exist in the 17th century. But also because I think they were very much pragmatic. So and maybe that this is a lesson. This kind of organization can only work if obviously by some kind of tolerance. For instance, the interracial aspects. But again, this is very much connected to maritime cultures of the day, because the ships of all nations, whether they were pirates or not, they're very much more interracial and international than we often realize. So I think you basically see a kind of maritime culture which transcends into criminality, but has a lot of these ideas, you know, about solidarity or moral ideas about what is right, what is wrong, where can you make profit with or not, that we now call progressive. But I think at the time were for this class of people actually almost traditional. Especially because they threw Christianity overboard. I mean, that's an important aspect. So Compan, for instance, becomes a pirate, and the first thing he does is he throws the Bible overboard. So the whole religious constraints of what they could or could not do were very consciously disregarded. That's also the Death Head's flag, we're sailing on the death, but also a lot of stories about the devil sailing with them, a Blackbeard who actually images himself as a devil. So that creates the space for the kind of progressiveness you're talking about, I think. But in a very different way than we should do it, maybe.
And then the other important things I believe is stories, the power of storytelling, because they were so marginal. They actually didn't have any power. They were like so small ships fighting against this world empires that's unfolding and taking over the globe. But looks like all newspapers and the people in the metropolis, yeah, they were talking about pirates. They were very known. They had like names, and they basically was a mass culture, something like a comic culture for us now, or you know, Hollywood. That was the pirates. So that's a very interesting how they did that. And it looks like, according to David at least, and that was what we were trying to do in our book, is it was a deliberate strategy. They used the storytelling as a PR weapon in a way, like that was also the invention. So I don't know, as a historian, what do you know about that, or can comment?
It's definitely the case that the fascination we have with pirates also existed in the 17th, 18th centuries for people. So that this whole this fascination for these people who go out, break all rules, maybe get rich in the meantime, have a lot of good times also, in contrast with everyday life, that was also already fascinating for people at the time. And it is, but there is a discussion about this, but it's quite possible that that a lot of the stories we know are actually stories told around by these pirates themselves. So trying to frame what they did in a certain way, although we cannot really prove this, but it's one theory. But it's also kind of manipulation, because they, for instance, this Compan, whose biography is written by the schoolmaster of his village, he doesn't want really to talk with him, because he doesn't want to implicate former friends, etc. So I think you're right, that storytelling is extremely important. It's also an aspect of today. It's very interesting that these stories get into the published media of the time. So both people who had no direct experience with piracy and the pirates themselves were very much aware of the whole phenomenon, and even of, as you say, distinct people. So there's one example there. The guy in one of the guys on the ship of Blackbeard, you know, the one who shot one of his sailors in the knee. He actually returns after Blackbeard dies to the normal existence as a sailor, but then his ship is captured by pirates, and then they see that he's on board and they actually know his name, so they immediately elect him quartermaster. So this is a kind of circulating corpus of stories, legends, which people, of course, use for their own purposes. So that would be very much an interesting theme for a book of its own, I think.
Stefan, do you have time for one last question? Michael wanted to ask something.
Yeah. The last
Where
question.
where did they get the ships? Like, they must be expensive. Is it not difficult to get a ship, or are ships taken by capture, or how do they accumulate that kind of resource to do piracy?
Yeah, often you start by taking over the ship you're working on. So telling the captain to go, and the other officers who want to stay with him. So so that's, for instance, how every starts. And then he takes other ships. So sometimes they move from their own ships to the other ship because it's bigger or faster, etc., etc. This leads that they sometimes have a whole a fleet of ships. Mostly when they are in a group of 3, that's the maximum. Some have fleets of 7 or so, but then they start to quarrel too much. So there are limits to this, to the ways they can expand. So that's one way. But what also happens is that existing privateers, for instance, or rich merchants who want to go into piracy, equip a ship, and then, for instance, they have the authority to act as privateer, but then they overstep their authority and they start to work as pirates. So these things both work together. What pirates never do is buy a ship. That's completely that's completely true. And they also don't build a ship over a longer period or so. And mostly, you must realize, mostly the ships they use are not that big. They have to be very fast. That's the main thing. So the Pirates of the Caribbean, also most of them worked in kind of what we would call sloops. So actually kind of very big canoes who could move very fast from one island to the other. But had a minimum of other possibilities. And maybe to add to that, a lot of piracy in the Caribbean is also enacted by the native Indians, the Arawak and the Caribs, and they do it on their, they build their ships, but these are the periaguas. I don't know what's the English word. So these are actually these big canoes in which they attack white settlements and things like that. I hope this answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. So you have to go now. So
Yeah.
We thank you very much to have come to this reading group, and hopefully we can have another one, maybe to talk about David's book on pirates when it will come out. Did you read the one you mentioned it several times? So I was wondering if you read it.
Yeah, I read it. I got an English PDF from Nika, but I also have the French version.
Yeah, I read the French version as well, which has been weirdly published before. But yeah.
Yeah, it's very. There's a lot to say about it. So maybe we should have in the fall.
A follow up. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
So excuse me that I really have to go. There's some problems I have to attend to. Well, that's a pirate life for you. Never a dull moment.
Wait, I just have an idea. Maybe next time we meet, we should invite people from the pirate party, the European pirate party, and you know, talk to them because they very kind of took the name, and it was so successful because it resonates with everybody's feelings. So I think maybe next time we can talk about how all these ideas are living now, in which way.
Yeah, that could be interesting. Although those people don't look very piratical to me often, but that's why.
I know some of them. Yeah. So let's ask them about this.
Okay. Have a nice evening again, and
yeah, thank you for coming.
see you again.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Yeah, so interesting. Yeah, I'm just struggling to finish our book with David. It's very important for me to have this reading group.
Yeah. It was very beautiful. So, shall we stay some moment to organize next week? We'll have another reading group, okay? And at the regular time. I thought we could set something like Eventbrite tickets, even if they are free tickets, but to have people sign in before attending to prevent stuff like that what happened at the beginning. So I'll see how,
exactly.
Yeah. So I'll see how does Eventbrite work, or we can just have a Google form for registration, but some kind of registration. So I'll give it a
Yeah.
try, and I'll suggest it in the mailing list.
We can ask Oleg to research it and maybe set it up with the website. Oleg, the developer of the site, we can ask him to do that. And what is the, oh, Vasily is here with us or he's gone?
No, he's gone.
I think, yeah, I think we should, yeah, we definitely should do that. And we should ask Oleg to do this.
And can you put me
Mm.
in touch with Oleg? I asked him because I lost my password.
I will
And
right now. Yeah, I will do it right now. Yeah. What is the next reading group? What's I don't remember because we wanted to have it not so often now. But
it's the 24th in the on the
no, it's
website.
not a reading group. I think 24th is a guest curators, Italians. They are the ones.
Yes, it should be, but let me see calendar. Yes, education and